but you can only do one thing well at a time.
Don't hedge.
Yeah, and I think hedging is the worst idea in an early stage company.
Welcome to NYC Round, the podcast for curious startup founders.
Founders invest way too much time up front in the technology, trying to perfect it before going out to market.
In each episode, I dive deep into the learnings and mistakes made by the world-class investors and operators who have helped make the New York City tech ecosystem what it is today. I have one final question for you, and it's about something you've written. What do you think are the biggest mistakes that first-time founders make that you can help them avoid? This week, I caught up with Jesse Middleton. He's a general partner at Flybridge Capital, a VC firm that invests in early-stage startups, and recently launched Next Wave NYC. This is a great episode for early-stage founders who want to learn how to better pitch investors, how to scale their business and focus on what's really important, and how to avoid mistakes that can derail startup momentum. Let's just jump right into it. Where does your story start, and how do we get to where you are today, heading up as a partner at Flybridge?
You want to go back to like my date of birth?
Yeah,
Is that
date of birth, yeah.
Yeah, so I happen to share a birthday with Elton John, so I feel good about
Really?
that. Not the same year.
That's a fun one. I don't think I share a birthday with anybody famous. July 1st. I'll have to look it up.
You definitely
Yeah.
do.
No, that's not true. I share a birthday with Canada. July 1st.
That's a pretty big birthday to share.
Yeah, there you go.
So I grew up in a very tiny town in Pennsylvania in the middle of nowhere. I grew up with two parents who my entire life were like solopreneurs, worked for themselves and worked together on businesses. So like sort of entrepreneurship as a broad idea, like don't work for someone, was embedded in like my household. They worked with each other and from home. But I grew up in this little town in the middle of nowhere. And so by the time I was like 6 or 7 years old, I had on my own covered every square acre of our town, like as we ran around the fields and the forest. Yeah. And so I sort of happened into finding the internet, if you will, which is like internet and AOL. And I just, I got curious. I wanted to connect with other people. And I was really fortunate that I had a teacher who noticed that I was really interested in computers. When I was in school, we had Apple II GSs in my 3rd grade class. They were donating those because they were upgrading them to Power PCs, which is a big deal. And one of my teachers, noticed that I was really just like, it was the one thing that I really latched onto every day. I'd spend time, I wanted to know how it worked, why it worked. Yeah. And so they offered to donate one of the computers to my family. And my parents fortunately took it. I immediately tore it apart down to every piece that could be removed. And my parents were pretty pissed. They were like, yeah, it was free technically, but like, it's your computer. And so I spent a couple of days putting it back together, trial and error, and ultimately did get it to work again. And that was sort of my first entry into like, oh, how do these things fit together? How do they work? Why do they work? And that led me on sort of a journey. I wound up getting into some online groups that were like little like script kiddie hacker groups that like to break into things. I learned how to like phone freak and steal phone calls from a public payphone. The things you do as a kid in the countryside, I guess.
Things you do as a 13-year-old in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it was better than being in the woods drinking,
That's right.
as a child. But so I really got into that, and I had to face this moment. I was suspended from high school for computer hacking. And the short version of the story is I was actually challenged to hack into mygradebook.com by a teacher of mine when I was a smartass and said, you're putting a grade book online. What if somebody hacks in and changes their grades? And he said, you won't be able to. And I said, challenge accepted. And so I did it. I was able to get in and change my grades. And he was giving me an A for the class for this. But unfortunately, I was the kind of kid that loved to talk about what I did. Can't tell now, very long-winded. And it's news spread through the school and the school district, and the school superintendent eventually suspended me from school. They wanted to make an example and say you can't be hacking even if your teacher tells you that you can. So there was this moment in time where my parents were like equally proud but also worried that like I would use this really interesting skill to wind up in jail. Yeah. And so I remember them very distinctly saying like, this is cool, it's great, your teacher did say you didn't really do anything wrong, it sucks that you're suspended, but it's fine. But if you keep going down this path, like you're going to wind up in jail. So maybe find a way to apply this to like something positive in the world. And so I wound up going to school for management information systems, half computer science, half business, and ultimately went into a career in computer security and network security work. And so I did that for a few years. And one of my clients was here in New York. And 15 years ago, they were a public company, and the CEO said, hey, you want to come join us and run technology? And I was like 22 years old, just got married. And I was like, yes, that sounds awesome. Moved from tiny town to New York City, maybe the biggest and best place in the world.
And this company must have been like a very small, no-name company that you joined.
Yeah. So that company was actually a company called LivePerson, and it was a public company. It was one of the only technology companies built and headquartered in New York.
Awesome.
The founder and CEO, Rob Locascio, ran it up until only a couple of years ago, so 20 years into its existence plus. But he was sort of thinking about this generational shift. And so they were a tech company. Their biggest customers are Microsoft and Apple and Verizon, I think, at the time. But they just had this like old school technology mentality. They were still using, their own physical servers. They had just started to port to the cloud. They were deciding whether or not they could even use Google Apps instead of, a Microsoft Exchange server. And so the idea was like, hey, Jesse's young. He's approaching the world differently. Let's have him come in. He'll join the executive team and sort of influence our decision on technology.
Right.
And that was like such a lucky break for me, because not only did it move me to New York, but because of our position as a company here, every VC, and there weren't that many in New York at that time, this was now 15 years ago, was looking for examples in New York of successful companies, especially B2B, to be able to point to and say, this is why I'm investing in startups in New York.
Right.
And the New York Tech Meetup was only a few hundred attendees every month. It just wasn't that big yet. And so most of the VCs at some point or another approached me and said, hey, you're the head of technology for a public company based here in New York. Like, do you want to come talk to our portfolio companies? Do you want to come meet us? Do you want to talk about trends? And so it sort of got me in the know of venture and startups and tech. And I eventually left LivePerson to start a little startup with a good friend of mine. And that led me very circuitously through a Craigslist ad to meeting Adam and Miguel at WeWork.
Yeah. What was your role at WeWork?
So I joined WeWork by co-founding WeWork Labs with Adam, who was the founder of WeWork, and my friend Matt. And the three of us kind of created this concept where we said, we want to create a space for angel-backed founders, startups in New York to come together, work together in sort of a shared space, share resources, share intros to investors. And at the time, there were a couple spaces like this. There was New York City, there was Dogpatch Labs that Polaris Ventures had. But we wanted something a little bit more ground-up community-led. Each of those had sort of their own take on the direction they wanted. Like Polaris was a venture capital fund that ran a co-working space, so it was pretty clear what they were looking for. And we said, like, we want to have a space that's really about members helping members. And so WeWork at the time, this is 2010, had opened their very first floor in Soho at Grand and Lafayette. It was the second floor of the building. The first floor below that in the ground was an event space that they were building out. And Adam was just starting to build the fifth floor, which was going to be the second WeWork destination. And we went in for a tour of office space for my buddy and I. And we said, like, we want to find space for like a half a dozen of our friends to come and work with their co-founders. And what started as a tour that we found off Craigslist turned into a few-hour conversation and then ultimately handshaking on creating this concept together and taking that fifth floor. And that first floor we opened was 47 entrepreneurs in New York City, all at the angel stage of, fundraising. So I started by building that and eventually came in and led a number of different parts of the business. The first one was leading our first business development organization. So I was bringing in companies like Row. Row wasn't around then, but companies like Row, and it was Microsoft, it was Google, it was Wilmer Hale on the legal side, and they would come in and they'd sponsor the space and they bring their executives or they bring their technical talent or they bring their lawyers to offer advice. And it was a huge value add to those founders. These are people who raised like $100,000, to be able to pay for an exec at Microsoft to come and be your advisor is impossible. And so that was sort of the first concept. We started building BD relationships. I then built and led our IT and technology organization, eventually building our first sales organization. In the last 2 years I was there, I built what became our corporate development group.
Right.
We were a young business, flying by the seat of our pants, so we didn't know to call it corporate development. But effectively, Adam and I would sit down, once a month and say, what's a strategic initiative? Where could we find a company to maybe invest in or acquire?
Right.
And so, once a month at one point, we were either writing a check or acquiring a business, and had a great time doing it. And so I spent my last 2 years there until 2016 leading that.
And then we go to Flybridge, but before we go there, what are your takeaways from what did you take from your journey at WeWork, especially for like founders that are curious what it was like?
Yeah. So look, when I got involved, we were like 4 or 5 employees at WeWork. When I left, we were almost 4,000.
Yeah.
There was a moment in time where we were hiring like 100 people a week, and we'd fly them in from around the world and have them stay in New York for a week and then send them off.
Yeah.
There are very few businesses that will ever hyperscale in that way, right? And frankly, in today's world with the advantages of AI, you probably will never need to hire that many employees at one time. You'll use a bot, use an agent. I'd say there are two big things that I take away, and I now take to every founder I've backed since. There's probably more than just these two, but the two that come to mind are, the first one is like, as an early stage founder, your single greatest asset is your time, and focus is the only way that you can develop a product and use your time wisely, meaning focusing on one thing and one thing only at a time. Founders have to be able to wear many hats. That's a very common thing to hear. But at any moment in time, you need to be focused on building one product, doing one role in the business, and excelling at that role. And you need to do that and see it through either success, where you can then build a team around that, hire somebody to lead that part. If you were the best at marketing, hire somebody to help. Or if it's a singular product, get to a place where you're truly found not just product market fit, but you've actually built a business around that product. And I think that founders often think that that happens sooner than it does. I would argue that like fit, if you're a B2B company, is when you've hit like $50 to $100 million of revenue.
Right.
Like it's pretty far in before you can claim victory and build the next product.
Right.
And at WeWork, for the first 4.5 years, we had one product. And you've been in a WeWork building. You guys are partnered with one. It was take a floor of real estate, chop it up, put up glass walls so everybody could see everyone, offer free coffee and free beer, and a lot of events and programming and some co-working and open space to hang out and meet people in, and sell that to 1 to 5 person companies, right? Month to month, and charge 3 times per square foot of what you paid for it. Very simple business, very straightforward, and a product that worked and a customer segment that was easily identifiable.
Right.
If you went to the New York Tech meetup I was talking about, that used to be 300 people, then it was 1,000 every month. There were 300 people who were all starting companies of 1 to 5 people who needed a space to work. It's easy to sell.
Very specific ICP. You could have easily have said our target is just founders, but that can mean so many different things.
Yeah, and so focus early on is the singular most important thing to nail as a founder. And it is really amazing to me. I've backed over 65 companies in the last 11 years. I've sat on the board of over a dozen of them. There isn't a single company I can think of where I haven't had to remind the founder of this concept of like, right now, do one thing and do it really well.
Yeah.
I don't care how great they are. Some founders hear it, heed the warning and do it, and others don't. So that to me would be lesson number one. The second lesson is that the only skill that you need as an early stage founder beyond your ability to focus is what we like to refer to as the Pied Piper effect, but it is the skill of sales, and the skill of sales irrationally early. And I'm not talking about just selling customers. I'm talking about selling an early employee, selling an early investor. It's having a vision. It's being able to back that vision up. It's being able to articulate it. And maybe one of the most important, let's call it sub skills, is the ability to sell so well that you can teach the person that you're talking to without them really knowing, because nobody wants to be sat there and taught a lesson, how to then resell your business. So when you pitch me as an investor, your company, one of the most important things that you need to do is not only get me to be excited and believe you, but teach me to be able to resell it, because I'm going to have to sell it into my partnership. I'm going to sell it into the next stage of investors. I'm going to potentially pitch other hires for you.
You're their first SDR.
Yeah. So one of the things I recommend that people do if they haven't is go take an improv class.
Yeah.
Like improv is one of the best ways to get really great at this, because the yes and is what gets you there.
Right.
And that sort of very simplistic idea that people use in comedy and in theater is what will play so well in this as a founder. And I just think that so many people focus on like the here and now, and they're like, I'm going to convince you to buy this thing for me. I'm going to convince you to join. No, I want to convince you to tell other people that they should join. I want to convince you to tell other people that they should invest.
That makes sense. I want to keep going on your first point about focus.
Yeah.
How do you find the balance if you're a founder? Like, let's say that some thing happens, like a competitor pops up or some market condition means that, the easy option is to go pivot your product. How do you balance like pivoting with also focusing on you mentioned you had a single product for like 8 years, but what happens if conditions change? Hey, before we get to their answer, I want to take a quick second to just thank everybody that's been a part of the NY Seed Round journey so far. If you've enjoyed these conversations we've been having with investors and founders, like, subscribe, and comment down below. Now back to the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, look, I go back to this point. You focus on one thing until you're not focused on that one thing, but you can only do one thing well at a time.
I see.
And so
Don't hedge.
Yeah, and I think hedging is the worst idea in an early stage company. Like, just absolutely the worst. It rarely plays out well. Best case scenario leads to a mediocre outcome. And frankly, it also often leads you astray of like why you got into this in the first place. Like, most founders come into starting a company because they're deeply passionate about a problem, whatever the problem is. And when you start hedging, you start giving up little parts of that. You're like, yeah, I really want to solve this problem in healthcare, education, but I could also, instead of just selling it to help kids, I could also help companies in their learning development department. Is that really what you want to do? So I think it's don't hedge. Your focus should be measurable and actionable. And so if a competitor pops up, that's not a reason to pivot. If your focus is on getting this product into enough people's hands and proving that you can sell it, and a competitor starts to really make that difficult and infringe on that, and you realize now you can no longer win there, you're not able to hit that goal, that's when you might pivot. But again, your pivot should be hard. It should be like, all right, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm now going to do this.
You're not going to do 50-50.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think we got into that after about year 5 in WeWork. We started launching things like We Grow, which is childhood education. We launched We Live, which was residential. We launched enterprise products. Where
I remember the 3-part plan.
Yeah. And it went beyond that. I mean, we invested in a wave pool company. We did all sorts of things, right? And what it does is like you not only is your business not wholly aligned, but your team's not. As you wind up with this thing where it's like, what do I actually care about selling? And I take this lesson, by the way, back from LivePerson. When I joined them, we had acquired a company in Israel. I don't remember the name of the company, but it was a consumer live chat company. And we were a B2B live chat company. We were like, Bold Chat. Before there was Bold Chat, it was bought by all these big companies.
Yeah.
And when you went to liveperson.com, you landed on a homepage that was like, spend millions of dollars on live chat if you're Bank of America or Apple, or talk to a therapist online. And the homepage was split 50-50.
Strict contrast.
It didn't make any sense. You were asking people to then choose a journey. And frankly, they either showed up knowing what they were looking for, in which case you're really confusing, like, what is this place? Or worse, they didn't know what they were looking for. They wound up there because their friend said, have you seen this company LivePerson? It might be able to help you. And they landed, they go, is my friend telling me it's a great business buy, or I need help in my marriage? What is my trade-off?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
you're at Flybridge today as a partner. What is Flybridge, for those that may not know? And then what type of companies do you look to invest in?
Yeah. Well, you led the question here. So Flybridge is a venture capital firm that I joined 8.5 years ago. I run it with my partners, Chip and Jeff and Anna. We invest in very early stage, pre-seed and seed stage AI focused and AI native companies. Our history has been that we've invested in very technically savvy founders over the years. So some of our biggest wins would be companies like Firebase that Google acquired, Crashlytics that Twitter acquired, here in New York in our backyard, MongoDB, which has become a very large database company, a publicly traded company today. And over the years, we've sort of seen that shift from big data to applied AI, like machine learning and natural language processing. And today it's generative AI. We are often very comfortable investing like in the friends and family stage. So we come in and you're incubating a concept. We know you well. We think you have a really interesting edge and are in secret. We back you, with $500,000 or $1 million check, work really closely with you for the next year or two, help to hopefully lead your seed round and then help you sort of go from there. And we're a really tight knit team. Most of our investment teams here in New York. I'd say we don't invest in the Bay Area would be my pitch.
Got it.
It's really New York and Boston are our two largest.
Well, why did you make that bet?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I saw it through the rise of WeWork, where we went from a place where the New York Tech Meetup was 300 people when I moved to New York. It was 1,000+ people who couldn't fit into the Skirball Center right around the corner from your office here every month. To today, when the New York Tech Awards happened a couple months ago, there were 3 separate 1,000-person events happening in the same evening in New York Tech. So New York Tech has just boomed in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
There's not a better place to live In my opinion, there's not a better place to build a company. And part of it was getting a front row seat. In building WeWork, some of the smartest people in the world that I had ever met were choosing to move to New York to build their next companies. Ex-Google, ex-Facebook, people that were just at Uber early on and decided to leave, or Airbnb. Some of these brilliant engineers, brilliant product people, brilliant business people were coming and calling New York City home. And I think this goes back to this point about focus. You can't do everything well. We're a small team. We raise $100 million funds. We write early stage checks. We have to get to know founders well. We have to work with them regularly. And so to be a great investor in a place like the Bay Area that has been the storied venture market for 30, 40 years, you need to be wholly dedicated to that market. You need to have people there full time, a big office. And we tend to ask when we see a deal from the Bay Area, it's often like, why are we so lucky?
Yeah.
What are we missing here? And so really, my partners, this is before I joined, had said the future for us is going to be New York. That's where we're seeing the rise of technology and the rise of startups. It's a massive market, great opportunity. And so we're going to really double down on that. It's not to say we're not opportunistic. Often we have a founder that used to live in New York and went somewhere. I jokingly said in an interview recently that we're like looking for like a New York state of mind, not necessarily a New York address.
Right.
And I think that is true. We've gone into this very distributed way of working and building. And so I have companies I've backed that don't have any employees in New York today, but New York is where they gather everyone, every single quarter. It's the place where the energy is. It's the place where they can get excited. It's the place where their customers are. And so seeing that for over the last 15 years, seeing that journey, being a part of it in one of the more storied companies here in the city, and my partners having backed one of the other largest tech successes in the city at Mongo, led us to say this is where we're going to spend all of our time and energy.
That makes sense. One of my favorite parts of your website is how honest your bio is. I wrote this down. It says, Jesse's venture career has been marked by a series of notable successes and a number of misses. What were examples of both?
All right. I'm going to start with the misses and we'll end on a high note.
There we go.
No, look, on the misses, I've been in New York for 15 years. There have been dozen multi-billion-dollar companies. I've backed like 3 of them. And so I missed more than I hit, right? But that is the business.
That's
adventure.
the game. Yeah.
For me, I think when I was really early on in my investing career as an angel investor, it was really easy for me to get comfortable backing people that I loved, but not necessarily doing the analysis of the business. And so I didn't know how to run a portfolio or build a fund. And so I would look at companies sometimes and I'd say, this founder is brilliant, so I'm going to write a check. And I'd look at other companies and say, I don't know if the founder is the best, but like, let's dig into the market. Let's dig into and when I focused more on the market is often when I was wrong. And so if I think back to it, I would look at something and I'd say like there was, early on in the city, it was a company called ZocDoc, which is quite massive now. But like looking at a company like ZocDoc, I looked at it and I said, you're gonna have to sell to doctors' offices, one office at a time. And like, how much are they really gonna pay you for this thing? And it's lead gen. And the rise of direct to consumer marketing was huge and the spends were massive. I didn't really focus on the fact that the founders were just absolutely extraordinary people. And they were gonna win no matter what. And so I didn't invest in ZocDoc. The flip side of that would be I did invest in a company called Squire. These guys built a marketplace of barbershops. They pitched every VC in New York and everyone passed on them. My friend Matt and I started Labs with me. We wound up writing them their first $100,000 check. And we wrote the check, and I will do the math for you, which is Dave and Song were brilliant, so love that check. They had never founded a company. They hadn't worked in tech before. Let's ignore that for a second and assume they'll figure it out. The math that I did was at the time they were building a marketplace and their pitch was, if Ticketmaster can charge $20 a ticket, we think we could charge like $1 to a consumer to be able to book their haircut conveniently. I was like, yeah, would I pay $1? I'm going to go get a $30 haircut. Would I pay $1 so I can guarantee my seat? Sure, why not? I literally went on Google and said, what percentage of the American population are men? About 50%. What percentage of those are adult men? At the time, I think it was maybe like 60% of those. Mm-hmm. And then I said, what percentage of those adult men are not bald? And it was roughly 65%, depending on which number you looked at. And then I said to myself, I get a haircut about 6 times a year. So if you take roughly 100 million adult men who are not bald, who get their haircut 6 times a year, that's $600 million a year in potential 99.9% profit revenue.
Yeah.
Just charging a service fee. That's a big business.
Yeah.
I'm in. Now they've built a far more sophisticated business than that, and it's been a phenomenal company to be on the journey of. But when I went into that company, the analysis wasn't my strong suit. I wasn't thinking about the market size and the competitive mode and all these things. It was really about the founders. And so we often say that in this business, it's about the people. I think for me, my bias is really heavily weighted to the founders and market versus the product they've built or the technology mode or any of that. I just went back and looked at my last 5 deals that I did at Flybridge, and the founders I've known one for 4 years, one for 11 years, one for 2.5 years, all prior to having backed them.
Yeah.
And the one before that, almost 15 years. And so I take a long-term approach to getting to know people. And when I'm backing them, I'm really backing the people. And that's where my biggest winners have come from.
You're just making every McKinsey consultant so proud with that exercise. That's awesome. When you think about how did your experience operating a business impact how you view investments?
Yeah. So I'm a bad operator of businesses. So I'll put that out there. I learned over the years what I'm great at.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of things that I'm great at. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of things that I'm not great at, that I don't know. But what I've learned is that the early stages of a business, it's about execution, and it's just about entrepreneurship. It's about creating the 0 to 1 over and over and over again, creating the first marketing campaign, creating the first product, hiring the first person, all of these firsts that have to happen. And as an operator, I was awesome at that. I was awesome at the 0 to 1. And where I would fall down was the 1 to 10, the first management layer, having managers, having reports. I laugh today, my team in New York, anytime that one of them says Jesse's my boss, we all kind of chuckle a little because not the relationship that we have. It's not the way that I operate. And so what I would say is there is a growth curve that founders need to go on. And this is why I love being on this side. I get to do the 0 to 1 over and over and over again. Right. For successful founders to build beyond that first or second stage of the business, they have to grow past that 0 to 1. And it's an area where I'm a far better coach than I am a player.
Right.
And I know that about myself, and I'm able to help people on that journey. I'm able to give them a lot of, history. This is what went wrong. This is why it happened. This is how to do it differently. I'm able to get them in front of the right people, the right other mentors and coaches, if you will. And I'm able to help them hire some of those early leaders. But I'd say the biggest thing for me is I need to back founders who I can see will do the 0 to 1 well, but have both the ability to grow beyond that, but also the desire to grow beyond that.
Right.
And so sometimes you find people that are you ask them what they want to do, and they're like, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always wanted to be a founder. It's not a red flag. Sometimes that works.
Yeah.
But it's certainly a bit of a yellow flag because you're you love the 0 to 1 part. I always wanted to be a founder. That's only a job for a little while. The better you do your job, the shorter that job exists. You're no longer a founder. Now you're the CEO or the CTO or the CMO of the business. And you're no longer a founder doing the 0 to 1. And I think to me, I was able, fortunately, during my WeWork journey to find that 0 to 1 over and over again. And the moment that I left was the moment that I no longer saw opportunity for the 0 to 1 roles.
Yeah.
And I was also starting a journey with my family where my son had just been born.
Different stage.
A different stage. And frankly, I'd been a very active angel investor for 2 years at that point, and my portfolio was quite good.
Yeah.
And so I sort of looked at it and I said, I love doing this stuff. I don't love operating.
Yeah.
I'm not the best at that. So can I bring those two things together? And that was, for me, it was venture capital.
Comes back to the point you made about focus, knowing what
just do one thing.
Do one thing really well.
I have an 8-year gap between my 2 children. I waited till one of them was really, really responsible, like a mini adult.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I could focus on 2 kids. Obviously, if I had twins, I'd find a way.
Right.
But it's just focusing on one thing and doing it well at a time is just so important.
Makes sense. You've made over 50 investments to this point. Is there an early investment that taught you something that you still use today in terms of, themes or lessons? Yeah.
So one that's been a little bit more recent. So I'm still sort of noodling on what this means to my investment thesis, but I used to fear regulatory complex spaces.
Yeah.
I would worry that, if there was some regulation hanging over it, that risk would be the thing that would bring the business down. That was sort of the biggest risk in my mind.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's generally true or was generally true. If you look back again, why did companies fail? It's probably because they didn't figure out either product market fit or they couldn't figure out a scale. It's not usually because some regulatory, burden was there and they, couldn't solve this problem and they were shut down by regulators. Like that's rare at the early stage. Right. I would say though that the way that thought is impacting me, and an example of that company, by the way, is a company called Jackpocket, which was recently acquired by DraftKings, and they were an early angel investment of mine, and they were building a digital platform to play the state-run lottery.
Yeah.
That was not a thing. It's a government or pseudo-government organization that runs a state-run lottery, and they were providing a courier service to go buy your lottery tickets for you. Like couriers were still a question. They went and bought a bodega so they could sell their own lottery tickets. There was a lot in there. We thought there's any moment in time the state of New York's going to step in and say,
right,
you can't do it. And what are they going to do with $1 million in the bank? They can't go fight them. They can't spend it on lawyers. You can't solve that problem. They were able to solve that problem, and it was a great exit for them and a great win for me. Fast forward, now 11 years later, with the advances of AI, one of the interesting things that I think will happen is that these industries that have complexity around regulation, you'll be able to solve those problems correctly sooner and cheaper than you were before, because an AI that's trained on the regulation and could say, here are how to do these things well. Like you're going to send out, I'll give you a very simple example. You're going to send out a mass email to your customers. There's regulation around having a footer of the email that includes an unsubscribe link and your address, right? Very simple. And if you use MailChimp or something, it's in the template, but somebody could delete it.
Yeah.
Well, with the way AI is, it's like, I know that's a rule. So when you hit send, I'm just going to make sure you're following the rule. And it's a very simplistic version, but you can imagine bringing it up. You're now selling a pharmaceutical drug, and your business needs to comply with all of these rules, whether it be get certifications so you can advertise properly, have the right HIPAA compliance, have the right SOX compliance. All of those things, technology can now step in and be that person, that authority. And historically, you would have had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers and internal staff and just focus on that. And so I think that's one big thing, is I'm not as weary of the regulatory complex industries. And I think they're very ripe for disruption because it's become sort of better, faster, and cheaper to build in those categories.
That makes sense. Flybridge is a prominent early stage fund, so you interact a lot with first-time founders who are pitching. What is the Jesse Middleton guide to raising money as an early stage startup founder?
So there are two archetypes that I've backed: first-time founder and second-time plus founder with a chip on their shoulder.
Right.
Love the second one.
Right.
Absolutely love it. I love a founder who had a small exit but not a big enough one to retire. I love a founder who never had the chance to build a team beyond 20 or 30 people, who is now like, I want to build a company, not just a startup.
Yeah.
So I think, that to me, I have a little bit of a bias towards that. However, I've backed founders who have cold emailed me as well. I think the biggest thing is, if you're coming to pitch me, you should know where my strong spots and weak spots are. And I'm very vocal about it. I'm very active online. I share a lot of what I'm thinking about. And so for me, I'm not really an ed tech investor. And so every time somebody shows up with an education tech idea, it's just not in my category. It's not in my area of focus. And it's not to say I won't get there.
Yeah.
But you're starting from a -1. If everybody starts at a 0, you're kind of starting from a -1. So for me, it's the founders who do their research on me and on our firm tend to be the ones who get a little further in the process. And for us, the process is very simple. Get to know one member of our team, partner or investment team member, get that person excited enough to want to bring you to another person on our team, get those two excited enough to then bring you to the whole partnership, and then we make a decision. It's usually a 2-week process. It's not a long thing. It's not drawn out. If you're going to have a 2-week process, but you're starting from -1, I'm probably going to have to meet you 3 or 4 times before I'm willing to bring you into somebody else.
Right.
And so I think in this manner, it's the founder that does that research is really important to me. The second one is a founder that is very open to knowing that what they do today and what they excel at today is not the thing they're going to excel at in the future. I don't want founders who just listen to all the advice that everybody gives them, but I do want them to be self-aware. This goes back to that 0 to 1 comment I had. I want them to have either seen that journey, they've worked at a company and got to experience that, or they've studied it. I don't mind if they haven't been a founder before or they haven't been in a startup before, but I want them to come in with their eyes wide open. I want them to explain where they see the opportunity for growth, not just for their business, but for themselves. And this comes back to something personally for me, which is I've been in therapy for years, and the idea of supporting yourself, investing in yourself, both personally and professionally, needs to be a lifetime goal. It's something you're going to do forever. I don't care how successful you are in this world. There's always room for improvement. And founders that are sort of a little bit more aware of that when they come in the door tend to connect with me more. I don't sort of have to teach them that or explain it. And look, we don't have to agree. We don't always have to agree. The best founders I've backed, we argue really well. We disagree really well. And part of the reason we do is because we both arrive at the table in the boardroom or in the, in the pitch, being aware that like, I might be wrong. And like, I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, I'm going to try to figure this out with you. And like, let's come out the other side and see where we land.
So do your research to make sure you understand before you get in the room with Jesse, like these are the things that he's comfortable with. There's plenty of documentation externally, like that can help you.
Look at my portfolio. That's the easiest way to do it. Like if you want to take the lazy track, like just go look at my list of companies and sort of know this is within that wheelhouse. The other one is I produce a lot of content, so you'll know that.
Yeah. There are a lot of pressures for founders to like build a long list and stuff, but I just view it the same as like looking for a job. It's like if you spend more time on 10 really highly qualified folks, you get to know the person that's hiring at those. That's way more successful than clicking apply on LinkedIn 100 times a day.
Yeah, and look, the pitch is something you're gonna get better at over time. So the more reps you get, the better, right? When you're going to find a job, you've probably thought about yourself since you were born, since the day you were born. So you sort of practice that pitch either in your head or out loud. When you're starting a company, maybe you've been thinking about it for a year, maybe for 6 months, maybe for a day, I don't know. And so reps matter. And so one thing I do suggest to founders often is like,
practice.
Give yourself the chance to practice. Somebody may surprise you, by the way, in that list. They may really show up. But if they don't, hopefully they'll be able to ask you some great questions that you can then take away and say, yeah, I kind of assumed everybody would know that, but they didn't. So let me bring that into my pitch going forward.
That makes sense. You're at WeWork, scaled to 4,000 employees. Based on that experience, you mentioned hiring 100 people a week. Are there mistakes you still observe that founders make when it comes to hiring? What are those mistakes?
Oh yeah, I think the biggest mistakes. Well, so my ethos is hire fast, fire fast. Mm-hmm. I think when you're an early stage company of limited runway, you don't really have the time to spend a ton of time hiring. You need to move quickly. It doesn't mean to make bad decisions, but make well-informed but not perfectly informed decisions. Often what happens is founders either just shoot from the hip, they do no research, they just hire somebody who's totally the wrong fit culturally or from a skill set. Or the other mistake they make is they spend way too much time looking for the perfect person. And the fact is that time is not on your side.
Yeah.
You have limited runway and capital and time. And so with every day that passes, every week that passes, you just have that much less time to be able to succeed, improve, the next phase of the business. And so I would just say, like, the faster you can get into it, the better. Trial work is great, all those things, but it should be like a 1 to 2 week period, like max. And then the faster you can get out of it. Yeah. The other big mistake, and this is not just startups, this is everyone. When something's not working, the belief that it's going to turn around, is it Occam's razor? I think is the, like the simplest answer. It's like, if it's not working, it's probably not going to work.
Right.
Like there are certainly examples where you can turn it around, but you have a limited runway, you have limited time. You don't have time to invest months into a person in the hopes that they become an A+ player.
You mentioned limited time. You need to focus earlier when it comes to like what you're building and the problem that you're solving. But what other areas of focus related issues do founders have? Like where do you see them spend way too much time and not enough time?
Yeah, I mean, the too much time is the technology side, frankly.
Oh, really?
I would say that not every idea. Some ideas are just pure technology. Yeah. It's like we're going to solve a massive technology problem, and then we're going to go figure out how to bring that to market. We have a company in our portfolio called A2 Labs, which is building this really cool platform to allow you to run CUDA models, which are basically every AI model you build is built for NVIDIA hardware, which is why it's so expensive and why it's so hard to buy those chips. And A2 Labs is allowing you to convert CUDA models in real time to every other chipset. It's a really hard technology problem.
Yeah.
You do have to solve the technology problem. The vast majority of companies are not that. The vast majority of companies are applying technology to an existing space, business problem set. And so spend the time in testing, iterating with potential customers, spend the time testing messaging and marketing, spend the time testing onboarding, like fake it till you make it, Wizard of Oz features kind of things are great ways to do that. And often founders invest way too much time up front in the technology, trying to perfect it before going out to market and figuring out, like, does this even solve or validate the problem? I was guilty of this early on. In my career, this is pre-WeWork, like where I built a product and I said, it was in the healthcare space. I'm like, it's got to be HIPAA compliant. It's got to be, I'm like, no, it doesn't. I don't have to sell to hospital systems. I can just tell people it's not right now. Now, of course, the moment I'm commercializing it out there, I need to make it HIPAA compliant. But in the very early days, what I needed to do was to go talk to potential customers, show them a screenshot, give them a demo, and see if it actually solved their problem they'd be willing to pay for. It turns out they weren't. So like in that moment, and we spent
a lot of
months
time
building and perfecting this thing. And then we showed up and they're all like, this is great, but we're never going to pay for it. I was like, well, that's not a good business.
You might as well know that though. That's good. You've written about the topic of paranoid optimism. Can you define that?
Yeah, founders have to be optimists. You can't go through this world glasses half empty and be a founder of an innovative tech company. You have to believe anything's possible. Mm-hmm. Like the biggest companies in the world built something that prior to that wasn't the biggest company in the world, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. So like before Facebook, there were lots of other social networks, and now there's Facebook. And if they would have looked at all of the history, they would have said, well, that's not a great business to be in. And so you need to be an optimist, but you need to go into it understanding that you should be an educated optimist. You should not try the same thing that everybody else tried at the same time, in that same moment in time. Like sometimes the thing that's changed in the world is the technology. Sometimes the thing that changes the culture. Prior to COVID, I was never on a video meeting where people recorded the meeting. Post-COVID, it's like 90% of my meetings are recorded. Right. Like culturally, it's changed. It's like we could record meetings before. We've been making film. Like it's not a problem. And so I think like whether it's technology that's changed, culture that's changed, like don't go in being blindly optimistic, it's possible to get to Mars. Like you should know the science behind it and how hard it is to get to Mars. But people like Elon would never have taken that leap if they would have been pessimists. They would not have said, no one's been there yet. It's too far away.
Right.
So I'm not going to try. Like that just, we would never see SpaceX. We never see Tesla. We never see the Boring Company. And so I just think for us, we view it as this is a skill that we want founders to have that often comes from like personal history. Like you've grown up that way. You've grown up seeing the world that way. You've grown up with parents who think anything's possible. When I was suspended for computer hacking, my parents said to me, like, it's all right. Like, stuff happens.
Right.
They're like, and maybe you'll turn this into a career, right? That was glasses half full. And like, I was raised that way, to think that way. Anything's possible. But I was also raised to also say to myself, well, if I keep going this path, I might wind up in juvie or jail eventually.
Right.
And there's another way to go, which could turn into a career.
Right. Is there an early mistake you made in your investing career that you have since learned from and is super useful for your efforts today? You mentioned earlier about not being paranoid about potentially regulated industries.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Yeah. Really, and this may be a sort of a cop-out answer. Like I didn't used to trust my gut in the same way I do now about people. Mm-hmm. I am a very quick judge of character, for better or for worse. And so for me, when I meet a founder and I think there's something special about them, there usually is.
Yeah.
And there have been multiple times in my career in my investing career, where I've met a founder and my gut has said they're special, but then I've overanalyzed, or I've dug in a little bit too much, or I've sort of
convinced yourself out of it.
Convinced myself out of it, let others convince me out of it. Equal parts, there have been people I've met where I've said, I don't know. Let me spend some more time with them and maybe I'll get there. Maybe I'll believe they're special. Maybe I'll believe they're exceptional for this business. Not they're not a special person. Everyone's special. But, and I'll spend time with them and I'll sort of talk myself into it. And generally speaking, if I look at the 65 plus companies, in the last 11 years, I think it's been, for the ones that have underperformed, if I really go back and I'm honest with myself, I'm like, on a rating scale, they were not a 11 out of 10.
Right.
They were like, maybe they were a 9 out of 10. I convinced myself they were 10. But there's a handful of people that were an 11. And those people are doing incredible things.
Right. That makes sense. I have one final question for you, and it's about something you've written. Quote, there's something special about working with entrepreneurs who have been through the startup journey before. First-time founders have an unparalleled hunger to prove people wrong, but second-time founders have a unique advantage. They've learned from their mistakes. What do you think are the biggest mistakes that first-time founders make that you can help them avoid?
Most of the mistakes that I think about in that specific comment are things I'm not sure that you can read about and absorb and learn or hear about.
Before you
have to live them.
Yeah.
There's a common theme, which is like first-time founders care about product, second-time founders care more about go-to-market, and I think it's one of those things where it's just, I don't know how many times you can see the story, hear the story, the example, but not approach it and be so excited about the product. That product is going to be the cool thing, the thing that makes it different. And for first-time founders, I would just say that sort of lack of prioritization of let's first test the market, let's understand, is there a buyer, is there a user, does it solve a problem, is one that I find myself like sort of drilling into first-time founders over and over, and they often don't heed it. They don't heed that warning. They sort of keep going down that path. So that's one. The second thing that I'm not sure you can teach is this like chip on a shoulder thing that I commented on. Like you wind up when you've done that first thing, but it wasn't as big as you wanted it to be. I was just with a friend who's a founder. He's one of the 3 co-founders of a big New York tech company, went public for a few $1 billion. And he was the 3rd founder and owned the lease to the company. And so this chip on his shoulder, even though it was a massively successful company, was one where his like problem is like, I only owned a few % of the company, right? And I'm like, not for nothing. You did very well in this business. And he's like, no, but I need something that's mine. Right. I need to build something of scale and substance, and I want to be the CEO. And so again, I'm not sure you can teach that. I can introduce founders to those people and they can hear those stories, but it's not the same kind of hunger. That's something you just live. And so for me, that's just a difference. There are plenty of first-time founders that wind up being wildly successful. It's not to say it's the only way, but there is something unique about second or third-time founders where they just avoid those mistakes because they've lived those mistakes. They've felt them. They've seen the repercussions. They've seen the feedback loop and what happens on the other side. And it's just not something you can watch on a screen or sit down across from somebody and talk through and walk out saying, yep, that's in my gut now.
Makes sense. Well, Jesse, thanks for stopping by. I learned so much. Appreciate it.